Please take a moment to silence your electronic devices. The program will begin shortly. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the FUSIONX stage at the ASU+GSV Summit 2026. My name is Alex Sarlin. I'm the Global EdTech Lead for GSV. Next up, we have a really amazing conversation about scaling what works, from AI as a tool to AI as a practice. And this is all about getting things to actually scale and grow. And we have incredible speakers who really understand scale very, very well. So first speaker is Manny Diaz Jr. He was the former state superintendent of Florida. That's one of the largest public education systems in the US. As you know, almost 3 million K-12 students. And he currently serves as the president of the University of West Florida. We have Penny Schwinn, former Tennessee education commissioner, who led transformative reforms, including Reading 360, a literacy initiative that achieved record reading gains statewide. We have Renato Feder. He is the Secretary of Education for Sao Paulo, Brazil, which with over 11 million people is the most populous city in the entire Southern Hemisphere. And last but not least, our great moderator, Jonathan Hage, founder and CEO of Charter Schools USA. It's one of the fastest growing companies in the US, over 10,000 team members educating 75,000 students in nearly 100 schools throughout the US. Let's give them a warm welcome to the FUSIONX stage.
Thank you. That was really nice. Hope everybody had a great trip in either yesterday or today, and nice to see you all. It's nice to be here from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Very similar weather, so not too cold. Loving it. And glad to have these guests today. Renato, actually down here, flew in with us this morning, and he had quite the trip coming in from Sao Paulo first, and then across from Florida. And Penny, I think, came in yesterday from probably Tennessee, I'm guessing. Yes, excellent. And I know that our former great commissioner of education, Manny, probably came in from the beautiful new Tallahassee region, where he is now the president of that university at University of West Florida. Great to have you all here today. One of the things, obviously, it's everybody's topic model with AI. It's almost like we have to say it all the time, and it's like, okay. So, but the fact is that AI, even now, already is no longer just a tool. It's becoming much more of a practice, and how do we integrate it in everyday life inside schooling? These three individuals run and have overseen massive systems. In Renato's case, I think we're now at 5,000 schools in your system and 3 million students, so you can imagine that impact, and I've spent time in Sao Paulo visiting that impact there. And so I just want to give each one of them a little accolade for being willing to be in this sector of education. The education sector, if you're a leader, like each one of these are in Tennessee and California, Texas, Florida, et cetera, you have to be, you have to have guts, you have to have a capacity to go into really hard things and take on hard battles. And it really does, sometimes we were just talking in the back, doesn't always encourage all the, not everybody wants to be involved in that sometimes, right? Because it's the hardest part of the process. It's not innovating a new product. It's where you're having to deliver it for students every day in a political, often environment. So I just want to kind of talk about that and then maybe go into some specific questions. So I'm going to change it up a little bit and maybe ask each one of them to help us understand their current environments that they work within or have worked within recently, and how this discussion I'm about to go into, per this discussion around AI as a tool and now as a practice, has had to integrate within those environments. So Renato, why don't you first start and give us a little bit overview of how that works within this large school system that you oversee.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So what I can start is that I don't have a space to make mistakes, because imagine 3 million kids, 200,000 teachers, and 5,000 schools. And we put a lot of technology in the schools, and we could not make mistakes. So we started with essays. And kids wrote very little in Sao Paulo, John. Like almost, they could go for a whole year without writing an essay, okay? And I wanted the kids to write. But who would correct millions and millions of essays? So we started with AI. In the beginning, there was a lot of cheating. Teachers said, it's not working, but we went little by little, and now it's working. Like, it's amazing how it's helping the kids. So they are writing a lot with handwriting, and we take pictures, and the AI correct essays. And in average, our kids are writing from 8 to 10 essays per year. So AI is really helping us in this. Look, it's not fancy, it's not future, but it's good for our kids and our teachers. So I'm really happy. And now the next step is about homework and open questions, because our kids also did no homework, 0 homework. And they started to do homework that we assessed them, but they were guessing, oh, this is A, this is B, this is C. They did anyway, like no commitment. But with open questions, AI is helping us a lot. So I'm really glad, that we are using AI, low risk. Kids are okay with it, doing more and more, and teachers are liking a lot.
That's great. I know, Penny, you've had this discussion, not just as a former state leader, but as a federal person that advises literally all the way to the White House and the U.S. Department of Education. How is this working now, in your view, between the world you've always sat in and now this new world where it's integrating, and how well is that working? I mean, where is it working, where is it not?
Sure. So I think that the challenge we have right now is that you have kind of the 3 Ps of what folks are balancing. So you have this personal use of AI, which is all the things that people are doing in their homes. You have the public use, which is government, and that's everything from, we don't have a federalized education system. So you have the federal government, you have 50 states plus territories who are all trying to develop totally different policies in a lot of cases. And then you've got districts who have different levels of instruction support. You've got districts that are 50 to 100 kids, and then districts who are, 1 million students. And all of them have the same task, and they have different states who are giving them instruction or not. And then you've got the private sector, and the private sector is moving significantly faster than the public sector. And so education tends to be behind. We're not like other sectors. We're not keeping up with what's happening in the private sector. So you have this disconnect where folks are using it, my mom uses ChatGPT to plan a vacation in the same way that, I'll go and talk to my cousins who are teachers, and they're using it to plan lessons. And so it's just how people are using in the private. When you have vendors or private sector that's coming into the public space to say, look at all of these solutions for whatever problem you might have, it is totally disconnected from being a state chief or a superintendent who says, well, that might be true, but I have a staff that's here, 3 completely different generations of teachers who have different tech awareness, capabilities, comfort levels. I have state policy that might be dictating what I can and cannot do. And we are 3 or 4 stages away from that. And so trying to bridge all of that together is really complicated. It is even more complicated when you are in a public sector role that has a level of public accountability that holds you to a very, very high bar. You can't make mistakes. You're trying to keep up because that's what's right for kids. Kids deserve to be ready in the United States just like they are in any other country, and most of our competitors are farther ahead than we are. And all of that has to come together. So I think being able to see it at all levels of government, seeing it in my own family, and then certainly thinking about it, as a state chief, former state chief, I do have to call out, we have one of the best superintendents in the country here out of the great state of Texas. But I think that one of the things that we do have to think about is what is the responsibility that we carry as public officials, and then how can we balance that to really promote student achievement in a productive way.
That's great. And Penny, you've done it better than I'm so proud that I've seen the work you've done in Tennessee and the advice and practices that have now gone national with your leadership. Thank you. Manny, you were the Commissioner of Education, which in the state of Florida was about the size of the state of Sao Paulo, actually, very similar number of students, whatnot. But now as a president of a university as well, how have you seen this integration work, and how is it integrated in a way where it's moved from a tool to a practice in your mind?
So I think both worlds colliding, right? Because as Penny mentioned, you have family use, personal use, what we've seen in the K-12 space, and a lot of it started with the idea of administrative tasks, right? How do we get teachers away from administrative tasks, more on task with spending time with students one-on-one or smaller groups, and then bleeding over now into higher ed as a university president. Two things that come up immediately, right? Academic integrity within the classroom, right? Because faculty members want to know what is the proper use of AI? How can I tell if a student's using AI to cheat? And as a matter of fact, I saw one study where they had a control group, and they sat there, they had 50 students go through this, they run it through the AI, and it says it's 80% AI. Well, we know it's not true, right? It's because they were sitting in that classroom monitoring the work. So how do we move it forward is having a comprehensive conversation of, it can't just be a tool. We can't go back. I remember being in a school administrator and watching the truckloads of computers come into a school building, right, and then be placed in a closet or in a classroom, collecting dust. And then we check the box to say that's an implementation of technology. Well, that's not even implementation of technology, and it's certainly not helping kids. So we need to have this actually integrated in the language that we speak when we're talking about lesson planning across the board. It is a new reality. It's moving 1 million miles a minute. In order to do that, everybody has to be on the same, and it has to start at higher ed, because where are the folks coming from that are going to be teaching our students over the next 10 years, and what's going on in the classroom today. And as we talked about before, John, as you're talking about, that group of students that's out there, we say they're digital natives because they were basically born with an iPad in their hand or a tablet. Now we're talking about AI natives, right? Because those kids that are being born today and in the next couple of years are going to be born right into that AI. How do we catch up? As Penny mentioned, our silo, our sector always lags behind everybody else. So we have to get ahead of it. We have to find a way to have these tools become part of the jargon, become part of daily practice by actually implementing them in ways that are effective. It's a tough situation, right? Because it's always changing by the minute, but it has to be part of your classroom practice. It has to be part of your organization or your district's practice and your state's practice in order for it to be effective, and that has to be led from the top.
Thank you. I want to go back to you, Renato. If AI handles the mechanics, right, the way you're using it as a tool, and that grading and transcribing of millions of essays, what does that super educator that we're trying to enhance and support in the classroom look like in your mind in the future as you go forward? How do you see their work, especially if they're reclaiming some time and helping them be more efficient, more customized to that student learning?
Well, John, in Brazil, we have a very, very challenging situation for teachers, okay? So imagine you go to university to become a teacher. You get a diploma for online, like very low reality, it's taught to you. So we get teachers with from 0 to 10, let's say 2 on preparation. So really challenging times for us in São Paulo. So with AI, so okay, now AI is doing some part of the work. So what the teachers can do as they have less work on preparation and pedagogical bureaucracy, we train them more. So what we are doing with this time and also with the help of AI is training. And they train each other. And this is really nice. We put teachers together with technology, no AI yet, but if you are, let's say, a history teacher, okay, you will be with other history teachers together for 2 hours per week, and the teachers love it. They exchange ideas. They exchange class management ideas, and they love it to be together. And my phone is ringing right now. I'm really sorry. Forgot. Oh my God. And not anymore. And so this is one. With the extra time, John, we train teachers, but in a way they like it. And the way they like it is between them. So this is really nice. We called multiplica, multiply. So we put, they open Teams on Microsoft, and they be together. And this is interesting, just for me to finish. We have 200,000 teachers, okay, in the system, 200,000. Every week, 180,000 are online together in small groups, in like groups of 15 teachers, but they attend and they like it, and that helps a lot.
That's great. So apparently they're doing a dance class behind us, which, you know, we weren't in the cool class, so the music coming through. You know, maybe, Penny, you could just pick up on that a little bit, because the interface between the practitioner, right, the teacher, the educator, and the movement from it as a tool, which many of them are using some form of a tool, but to a practice, and how they develop that as a permanent skill set, that they train each other or articulate that with students, when often the students themselves are ahead of the teachers, right? Because they're the AI natives. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing and how can the educator stay up with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's 2 things. We can learn a lot about AI moving from a tool to a practice just by looking at mistakes and successes we've made in literacy. And so you think about literacy policy in this country, we've got 47 states or so who've passed massive literacy policy. Implementation does not look the same state to state. And I think we forget that the number of stakeholder groups required to be in alignment to make something work is over 32. And that's everything from, you think about the president, you think about both houses of Congress, you think about the judicial system, but then you think about governors, state legislators, state chiefs, all the way down. You've got superintendents, you've got their cabinets, principals, teachers, philanthropy, private sector, and you could go on and on, but there's about 32 relevant groups that all in some way, shape, or form push into how policy moves to some kind of product or tool, then moves to practice. So now when you think about that with something like AI, where it's not what everyone grew up with, where you don't have that same comfort level across generations, where you now actually don't have the students who require the human adult to teach them, you've got students who are actually more proficient. That's an additional layer of complexity that we're dealing with. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to think about kind of, I'm from Tennessee, so snout to tail, what are we thinking about snout to tail that we have to apply for AI for every single stakeholder group to understand? This is what everyone needs to know, be able to do, and here's exactly what that looks like for a student in the classroom, and how do we get everyone aligned? You're not gonna get that on 100 things. You have to pick your priorities, go after that doggedly, master it, and then move on. But I think one of the things we've been doing is trying to say, okay, great, we have to keep up with the kids. We have to keep up with the kids. So we take this blanket approach and hope that it's going to work. And that's just, we have to take the opposite approach now and say, this is where our kids need to be. How do we get all of these 32 stakeholder groups to row in the same direction, understanding that this is the goal and we're all moving towards the same goal? And that's really, really hard. It is very possible with strong leadership, I think some accountability, and some flexibility to be able to make mistakes and move into what will ultimately be the better product, better outcome, and frankly, better practice in classrooms.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So if that ed tech product, Manny, that you're speaking about still is seen as a shiny toy, and that's what often the history of ed has, or tech has looked like for educators, right? That's purchased but not necessarily integrated, and it's used in this area, and it's all different formats, whatnot. How do we shift that mindset so that AI becomes a fundamental practice like literacy, where rather than a symbolic gesture, we're using the best power of it in the right way to effectuate teachers' learning and the education environment itself?
Yeah, but I'll give you an example from Florida. We went to progress monitoring in 2022, right, where we take these waypoints throughout the year before we arrive at that final test, and it's telling us where strengths and weaknesses are, where proficiency is, what the plan of attack. It's a perfect place to implement AI, right? How do we have a force multiplier in a classroom where now, by state law in Florida, the parents have to receive the report, student receives the report, teachers receive the report. Now, if you have AI, we've been constantly chasing differentiated instruction, right? We always talk about different, but what does it really look like? Here's an opportunity to harness this superpower and actually break up these groups and give teachers the opportunity to show some of those superpowers where they can actually enhance what's going on in each group at the level where they are and address the deficiencies without having more human beings in the group, right? So it's harnessing within the practices that one example is, progress monitoring, you already have that going on. Lesson planning that ties into that progress monitoring, being in alignment. When you're talking about alignment all the way to the White House, let's talk about alignment inside that school building, right? From the leadership all the way into each individual classroom. And I've seen the data that Renato has at his fingertip. Very impressive that he's able to see district level, school level, classroom level, student level to every student in his state. Well, we need to implement that at the classroom, at the school level, where we could actually differentiate the instruction and harness that tool, because it's something that we have to view as positive, right? But we have to harness that because it's always going to get ahead of us. But this is a place where we can actually implement that and have real practice and have real world impact on these students in that classroom.
Yeah, I love that, because I think the question is, can the policies which move slower and the systems which are built upon, let's just be honest, sort of long-term older formats and regulations, rules, and ultimately laws, how do they keep up with the fact that this is moving so fast? And all of you sit in a unique position either today or in the past where you have to integrate that constantly. Talk to me a little bit about, any of you that you'd like, just to sort of, how do you see that happening today, or how do you think it should happen, perhaps?
All right. I believe, John, in accountability for every teacher and every principal. So this is tough words, because in Brazil, like I had great principals and not so good principals. But what we do, we show the results and we make everyone responsible. So I give power to the principal and I show the results everybody can see. And this is changing the education in São Paulo. So I can see student attendance, I can see which kid did his homework, and if he cheated, if he didn't cheat it, got it right, got it wrong, how he's in math, language, everything, science, and the principal is responsible. So I support a lot, but also the results are there, so the principal needs to go for the results. And this is doing, like, it's very interesting. When I go to a school and I talk to the principal, he says, you know, I hate you, but I love you. He hates because all the results are there and all his faults are there so anyone can see. But he tells me, I'm a better principal because of that.
Can I
Yeah.
So just that made me think of policy versus implementation. And I think oftentimes, like, I love a good policy, y'all, but it is so much easier to get a policy passed than it is to implement something effectively and well. And I think that right now, what we do is we celebrate policies getting passed because that is something that we can achieve. And we can put on an end-of-year report and show everyone, here's what we did. But that is so much different than actually getting practice to change. And we've learned that over and over and over in education, but it's so much harder to do, and we haven't necessarily allowed ourselves the time, space, and flexibility to get that done. And so when we talk about all these practices that we want to achieve and the things that we want to change in classrooms, yes, and we've actually created a system where we incent and reward just passing another policy, and then we all wait for the policy to get passed. So we've got policy overload. I would actually argue that let's get a very clear understanding of an AI architecture that we can all follow. We have rules of engagement that protect children and data privacy. We have lots of transparency, and we have that framework. But we invest in, support in, focus on the implementation side and actually show a proof of concept about how that can be done. So we're not focusing on the policy. We're actually saying, this is how you implement things well in education, and this is how you do that with the child, the student as the focus. And we have not yet figured that out, and this is actually a moment to learn from all these mistakes we've made and say, this is a really hard problem to solve. Let's go solve it and actually all start moving in that direction.
Well, I'll attest to that, Penny, because I had to actually live that, right? So I was in the legislature for 10 years, passed a ton of education policy, and then was handed the keys, okay, you go implement this. And it is hard, right? And, you know, when you get legislatures together and they come up with these great ideas, being a recovering legislator myself, and then all of a sudden they leave town and you have to implement all of this. It's hard work. But I would say, I'll go back to the term you use, alignment, right? And that alignment also has to be in professional development, right? You have to be moving all these pieces at the same time. It's kind of, you're building the plane as you fly it, and all of these things have to line up. But if you're not providing the proper professional development to your folks, that you're asking these people to go out into the field and where the rubber meets the road, fight these battles, you have to prepare them with alignment. I go back again to the examples. Boxes get dropped off. We checked up. It's kind of like policy. We check the box and move on to the next thing. How does the professional development, and how can you use the AI to enhance that same professional development, even in the use of this new practice, right? We don't call it a tool, we're saying it's practice. Yeah. You have to have the buy-in, and if you're gonna have a bunch of people that are terrified of it, right? So how do you make them feel comfortable? Because the first-year teacher and the teacher who's in their 25th year have a completely different image of what this is. You have to make them all feel comfortable in this new environment.
So I think the one thing I want to just dig in on a little bit, where we have 6 more minutes, is the courage it takes in leadership and education right now is a real factor, and I just want to put that on the table. Having to deal with this within our own students and our 100,000 and watch it, if you don't go through the fear factor, face forward, and focus on it correctly, then you're constantly making excuses for going around and not dealing face forward with the reality that AI is here. Now what do we do with it to enhance student learning in a way that was fundamentally not possible just a few years ago? So in that environment, we also have the ability now to write new rules, perhaps faster rules, better rules, or even ones that kind of go around the existing rules, because AI is not waiting for the rules, right? What is your thoughts or guidance to creators as well as innovators as to what are the ways that they can kind of still move forward at a fast pace, but at the same time, obviously checking off those boxes that they have to do? Because that is the difficulty, right? I mean, the difficulty is that one is moving at light speed and one is moving at not so fast speed.
Yeah. And I agree so much with what you said. You know, implementation, it's so hard. I think with AI, adaptation, so every kid has a ton of homework that we send them, and let's say math homework. So he gets 5 questions. If he gets 2 wrong, the first 2, he could get an easier one on the third one. And maybe if he gets wrong again, even easier. So this adaptation on a large scale for us is hard to implement. You know, teacher training, every teacher needs something different. AI can help every teacher in a different way. But this is hard to implement and takes courage, and also details and persistence. So with my team, we say, is it really working well? Because we have like so much AI, but it's hard to get it perfectly right with a big system. So implementation and adaptability for me.
I would say quickly, I'm going to use your math analogy a little bit, but I actually think it's focus. When you have 100 priorities, you only get to do 1 or 2 things in each. So if you fail on one of them, you've kind of bombed the whole thing. So my team used to, one of my discipline things was I get 5 priorities and you can't go into a second hand. And I can still name the 5 right there, right? Literacy is always going to be one of them. It should be in every single state in America. And if I were still a chief, I would have literacy, I would have numeracy, and I would have AI as one of those 5. But you talk about it all the time. You're super clear with every stakeholder group. This is what we're doing. Here's your role in it. Here's how I need that to move forward for kids. And then you have 10, 20 strategies maybe underneath that because you have all these groups, but it gives you room to fail because now you've got 20 at-bats under that one priority. So maybe 2 are, they're a flop, but you got 18 wins. And so you can still give people wins in implementation because you've focused and everyone knows come heck or high water, you are going to be doing this. Like they knew Penny Schwinn cares about literacy. Like that's what we're doing, folks. And that should be the same type of march that we're having in AI, where everyone understands their role, they understand where we're going, but you have enough flexibility to make those errors. And you cannot do that whether you are a principal, a superintendent, a state chief, if you have 100 priorities, because then it's just one in a mix of a lot of things. And right now with where we are and the catch up we as a country need to do, AI and the broader use of how we integrate that across multiple initiatives has got to be one of our major priorities with literacy. I'm always going to put that in, kids got to read.
I think you have to have focus, John, focus and discipline, because this is something it's going to rapidly change around us while we're doing it, right? And you have to be focused on the end goal. And if you're talking about literacy, you're talking about numeracy, and you're talking about this becoming a practice, you have to stay focused on the things that matter. Everything else is just noise. And you have to understand that things are going to change. And what I always tell my team, especially, is we're going to swing and miss. I mean, we're going to swing and miss, because if you don't swing and miss, it means you're not trying hard enough. But you have to stay focused on the end goal. And I think it does take courage first. You have to have the courage first, but then discipline to stay on that, right, and perseverance.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you guys. As you wrap up, maybe just give us one last thought to give us hope, because there's a lot of fear. I think that fear is mostly a lack of understanding or a visibility to what can be done with all the power that comes with AI. Give us a sense of hope of what the power is unleashing for the average student sitting in a classroom.
I'm very optimistic. I'm very positive. I think public education in São Paulo is getting better and better with the help of technology if implemented in the right way, and giving autonomy to the teacher, autonomy to the school, but also accountability. So this is technology and AI. So I'm very positive, and I think in maybe 5 years, public schools will have the same quality as private schools, and the gap is shrinking between them. So I'm very optimistic.
I'm optimistic about the experience of students. I think that when we talk about how much we're adding on to teachers, and every year it's a little more, that has nothing to do with why they decided to become teachers in the first place. And AI has the ability to take away a lot of those operational and bureaucratic things that weigh them down. It's not what they love. It's not why they got into the profession. They want to have a relationship with the child. They want to make sure they can look a child in the face, know that child by name, know a lot of things about them, and then educate them to the outcome come because both are invested. And we've slowly lost that relationship component and the ability to know your students at the level that we all want as educators. I think AI will actually streamline so many of those operational features to create a much richer classroom environment and also give the information that teachers need in order to provide an exceptional level of instruction to every child. This idea that every child gets an A+ in terms of experience, no matter where they live, rural, urban, suburban, whether they're wealthy or not, regardless of the school type. This is a solution for that problem, but the winner of that is kids, and I think that could be very true very quickly if done well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think with the proper guardrails, that it's harnessing this power to truly give personalized education to every child, regardless of where they are in the world. We've always talked about regardless of zip code, regardless of that. This is an actual opportunity to harness that, John, and really lift those students to a just completely different level. Think about the amount of information and knowledge that students can gain with the help of this. And it's assisting the teacher in actually really being able to get there.
Great. Give my guests a hand. We appreciate you guys being here today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? All right. My name is Andre Benin. I'm the founder of Mad Journey Holdings. And in pursuit of my passion for skilled trades and apprenticeships, I founded this holding company to partner and acquire home services businesses. So I was previously a managing partner at Rethink Education. Now, most importantly, it's truly an honor to introduce two leaders who have had a profound impact on my life and career. I'll start with Bill Hansen. Bill is a nationally recognized leader in education and workforce, having served as Deputy Secretary and Undersecretary of Education under George W. Bush. I've had the privilege of working with Bill early in my career, first on K Street, and later in Indiana when he became CEO of Strata Education, who I was his first hire. Today, he serves as President and CEO of Building Hope, where he partners with communities across the country to create spaces where learners can truly thrive. Bill took a chance on me early, and I'm deeply grateful for his mentorship and the role he's played in shaping who I am today. Now to Eric J. Holcomb. When you see me, usually in the world, you see me wearing a blue hat, a blue Indiana hat. It's not because I'm bald, although I am. It's because my time in Indiana serving in the governor's office meant so much to me. Governor Holcomb, the 51st governor of Indiana and current chair of a Better Way Policy Institute, is a leader defined by action and consensus building. He's the only governor to have made a basket in all 92 counties in the state of Indiana. But more importantly, he showed up for the people in every corner of the state. I remember getting texts from the governor like, I was in Johnson County today, can we help this constituent? And then following up to make sure we delivered. Even in a supermajority state, he led with collaboration, always focused on what could be best and what could benefit Hoosiers. His vision was simple but powerful: take Indiana to the world and bring the world to Indiana. Under his leadership, he did exactly that and took Indiana to the next level. Please join me in welcoming these two extraordinary leaders.
Well, thank you. This is a treat to be able to have a conversation with an incredible governor and dear friend. And Andre, thank you for the introduction. It was the best first hire I ever made. So, well, Governor, I just wanted to tee this up a little bit as we're thinking about the title of our session, Civility, and who's your roots and what you did most recently at Harvard. But I just want to also just kind of serve as a backdrop of our conversation that we're moving into the 250th anniversary of our dear and wonderful country. And as we think about the next generation of students and thinking about our schools of tomorrow, our jobs of tomorrow, our economy of tomorrow, I just think it's kind of a good grounding for us to be thinking forward here. But also just thinking back to 1976 at our 200th anniversary, just to give you guys all a math problem. I was a junior in high school, 17 years old, and I remember the best song of the year was Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John. And just also thinking back of my life, of those 50 years, of just how the classrooms changed, how our economies changed. You know, we are 3 years away from the Iran hostage crisis, and I was still using a push-button phone. We had actually migrated from the dial phone, but just thinking about the tools of learning and the tools of our economy. Just in the last session, it talked about AI. I just really am fascinated about the next 50 years and where we're going to be going. But I just want to turn it to you a little bit. I don't know if everybody in the audience really might have a deep understanding of who you are and your story, and so I just maybe let you talk a little bit about your story and your values and what brought you to the governorship. So.
Sure. Well, it's so good to be with you specifically and to be here again. So good to be back. I, as most probably did, unless you flew in on your own jet, flew in on Lindbergh Field. And I've gone down this rabbit hole before to where, you know, why is it named Lindbergh Field? And this, you know, this young man from St. Louis. And it was actually, having this event, having this topic discussed here, there couldn't be a better backdrop than Lindbergh Field. In that, back in, 1918, to put this thing all in perspective, what you just did in context, 1918, this hotel owner in New York puts out this $25,000 prize and says, who can fly solo from New York to Paris? And it's this young man, 25 years old, who puts in $2,000 of his own money, dollars, and raises money from people that he had given flight lessons to in St. Louis, and a company in San Diego who said, we can do it. And fast forward, in 1927 is when he made that 2-day flight. Think about that flight, 2,000 miles over an ocean, 2-day trip in the dark. A friend of mine said there's something different about, at night over an ocean for 2 days than just in your backyard looking up at the stars. You think about the courage that took. And this company built this aircraft, Ryan Airlines, right here in San Diego, right where that field is, in 60 days. Design, test, build, deliver, make flight, and he wins the prize, right? And so without that courage, without really leaning into it, just like the collection of companies that are here today and individuals and leaders that are thinking about, to your point, after 250 years, where are we and where do we want to be when we celebrate our 300th birthday? And so when I stop and think about everyone that's here and the energy and the potential synergy of all that, I get pretty excited about the individual and not just the expanded liberties that people have. And that's what, draws me to this area of conversation. And I'll just break it down, and usually I would always try to simplify things. I'm not real comfortable talking about myself. I'd rather hear about other people, but I'll give credit where credit's due, and that's 2 loving parents. If I had one wish that could come true, it'd be that everyone had 2 loving parents. That instilled in me, as did my friends and my wife, and playing sports with your buddies. You learn things about respect And you learn things about how to win and lose. And you learn things about everyone has a role. Certainly, serving in the United States Navy taught me that the person on your left and the person on your right is just as important as one another. And especially when it comes to completing that mission. And I think the Navy got me flying straight in terms of being mission-oriented and having a sense of urgency about what we're doing. Meaning, you know, serving in government's not always easy. It's not supposed to be. By the way, it's a privilege. Yep. People are entrusting you with a responsibility to hopefully do what you said you would do, and that's to leave the campsite a little better than you found it. So here we are.
Well, thank you, Governor. And you know, I had the blessing of living in Indiana for the 8 years that I was CEO of Strata, and I just overlapped with your 2 terms quite a bit. But I loved one of your themes of that, you know, we need to build an economy for 2050 and not 1950, and just I know a couple of the things that you did with, you know, creating your workforce cabinet and expanding school choice and the graduation pathways. Just maybe a little bit of context of really what you meant by that, and kind of looking forward with your policy decisions.
Yeah, 2 things always remain, or a few things remain true, and that's, you know, time flies, and the world gets smaller and smaller, meaning that the usual suspects are showing up saying, how can we improve on our rankings or our ratings or our graduation rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, rating level, math levels, et cetera. And for us in Indiana, we've always embraced, and again, credit where credit's due, before me, but we've always not been adverse to change. But it's not just changing for changing, you know, respect. It's how can we get a different outcome? How can we improve? And for us, it was all about, you're hearing this yesterday, I've heard it a lot today, is decentralizing and customizing and personalizing and making sure that we're tethered to the customer, the student, and or the teacher, in terms of how we deliver a good education, how we deliver good training programs. We always tried to look at this from both ends, the polling, the business community, what we need. It's all about supply and demand, right? And so what do we need as the different verticals in our state, and then how are we preparing the workforce to meet that demand? And that meant these pathways, whether it was to higher education or further education, perpetual if that's your thing, and or enlisting in the Navy or employment right out of school. And so for us, it was about kind of an efficient program to make sure hopefully students were pursuing what they loved. I mean, if you could measure, and you can, I mean, if you could determine students who love to be in school, students that love their teachers, students who love to learn, typically it turns out okay for them. Yep. It's the ones that aren't looking forward to it. And now, why? And then oftentimes it's they're in a lane or on a track that they don't know where it's leading to. There's all these bridges to nowhere, right? And so we were trying to attack it from both ends, from the student-centric, through that lens and through what was needed in the state. And you can never do enough, obviously. And we took a lot of shots on goal. And if it didn't work out, we were just honest. We were very transparent. We turned our cards face up and said, you know, didn't work, but we've got something that we're going to try or expand. And then always we would try to increase what was working. Sounds simplistic, and it is.
Yep. Well, just you know, going back to 5 years ago in the midst of COVID, I do remember that
Do we have to?
Our institutions, I think, really lost a lot of trust in the public. I actually serve as the vice president of the State Board of Education in Virginia, and Virginia actually had the largest learning loss of any state in the country during COVID, and took us the last 4 years to dig out of that. But there was a lot of trust that was lost. A lot of I think families have, you know, made decisions on education and other issues. But just what were some of the practical steps that you needed to do to help instill that public trust these last several years?
I could get emotional about this topic. Certainly you had to bite your lip to almost it bleeding. It required a lot of patience. It required keeping cool. It required leading by example. I look back on those years, and I've often described it as that's when Hoosiers went to Oz. We pulled the curtain back, and Hoosiers got to see on a very regular basis who was in charge, and they were neighbors of theirs. They learned that they weren't bureaucrats. These were people who cared deeply about their neighbors, who were trying to take a very balanced approach to getting through something that none of us had gone through before, where information was changing by the day. And so we had to have a very balanced, calming effect, which meant we had to communicate a lot, like over-communicate, be very transparent and very accessible. And I think that helped us get through and not respond. It's kind of like if you go to the free throw line and there's a bunch of people watching booing you. Like, you have to be able to tune that out and sink the shot. And that speaks for itself. I mean, there were days where people would protest on the governor's lawn and dress me up like Hitler and carry long guns. And there were people that said, you got to come out and you got to just lay into them. And I let their actions speak for themselves, and then let the electorate judge who they wanted in charge. And so it does require discipline for sure, but it requires putting yourself out there and not shrinking from the responsibility, back to it being a privilege during good times and bad and tough times. And so, again, I think it's who you are at the core that really shines through, especially in the challenging moments.
Thank you. Back in December, I still subscribe, and part of my leading with Civility to the Washington Post every day, as I have for 50 plus years. But I opened up, and there was an editorial by Governor Holcomb about your sabbatical or your time at Harvard last year, and just very intrigued with your commentary there. And I just really would love to hear a little bit about your time there, but also just really some of the lessons learned and just how it affected you as you're moving forward here.
It's fascinating, and you know, I've always been one of those people that says, don't complain, show up. And so when I got the invitation to go, a lot of people said, what are you doing, going in the lion's den? You know, I didn't have to tame any lions. It was a very warm welcome. And what I found were students of all backgrounds, political persuasion included, that were interested in the curriculum that I was leading. And it started out, I had it titled Leading in Divisive Times. And I crossed, before the first class, crossed out in and replaced it with through, because I was optimistic, especially being around these students, that we could get through this. Mind you, this was when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And I had, like I said, Democrats and Republican students who would come faithfully and say, how do we get through this together with one another? They were wanting to be part of the solution. And I think about, you know, when we started out, that's almost on its head. It used to be that the younger cohort were the rabid, red meat, you know, more radicalized, you know, folks who were wanting to change the world, and less civil. And it was the older statesmen and women who were, yeah, I've been through that, I then got that out of my system, now we're trying to affect change. Now that seems to be the opposite. Now these students were coming to me saying, but how do we get through this? How can I be constructive, not destructive to the whole system? And so that gave me a lot of hope for the future. And, you know, the curriculum included kind of an 8-step process. So, you know, each week we dove really deep into, and you've heard around here, I've already heard common themes of how you, you know, cast a vision. What is your goal? Whether you're, again, whatever political jersey you wear, a lot of times we share the same end goal. but how do we get there? And it requires you to kind of cast a vision. That in turn attracts the team that's critical to realizing that vision. And then that team builds the plan, the actual plan, the thing that is necessary. This is not rhetorical. This is something that we're going to execute on or implement step by step, time stamped. After you implement or execute that plan, then you got to measure it. And then whatever the results are, good, bad, or ugly, you got to share them. And that sharing those results, I see the superintendent of public instruction from Indiana is here today. You know, we had to be honest with people about the results, where we were. If we were going to improve our literacy rates, we had to talk about it. And not in a defensive way, by the way, but here's what we're going to do about it. Now help us. And so you share those results, you learn from them, you're informed by them, and then you adapt, you tweak, having that gained information, and then I always would say rinse and repeat as the final step and go right back at it. And the students really honed in on that plan part, and they could detect, you know, whatever week it was, whatever had happened that week, what was the plan? You know, if they were watching something on internationally, if they were watching something nationally, whatever the issue of the day was, and they would hone in on, if I ran this through that 8-step process, where would we be? And so I was encouraged, and I continue to be when I get around kind of younger, not just Americans, but younger folks around the world who want to be leaders, their ability to say, we can impact and affect change in a very positive way if we're well conducted. It goes back to that civility part. They understood that conduct is central to success. Otherwise, it's rather fleeting when you stop and really think about history. If you're well conducted and you have a team and you've reached out and you have people with different perspectives, that change tends to be more enduring and not undone by whoever's next.
Maybe tell me a little bit about your Better Way policy group and just what the next chapter is for you right now, and how you're taking all these lessons learned from your time in public service and this last year off, if you will, to really how you're going to apply this going forward.
Yeah, it's almost like we're married again this last year off. My wife and I get to see each other, unlike it's just two ships passing in the night. I don't know if she'd renew her vows, but we are still married through it all. But it gave me almost a year, and did the stint at Harvard, but it gave me time to really reflect on where I wanted to spend time. And as a governor, you do a lot of things that you don't want to do, but you have to do, obviously. This gave me the opportunity to focus on what's my area of interest, that if I devote 100% of my waking hours to, where would it be, instead of just preaching to young kids to find your passion project, you know, make sure it's aligned with your personality. Now I was saying it to myself, trying to be very discerning about not saying yes to 1,000 different good asks or causes. And part of it was coming out of Harvard was starting this Better Way Policy Institute, where I could remain tethered to the next generation of leaders and try to pitch in and do my part. In Indiana, we're blessed, as are a lot of states, with a lot of leadership groups, primarily focused on college-aged and young professionals. I back that up into high schools. And so we're rolling this out around the state of Indiana right now, to make sure that, not in a political way, in a non-partisan way, different community projects, thinking about how you build not just stronger individuals and families, but stronger communities, and getting younger folks involved before they, you know, set sail into their professional life, whether that be higher education or employment or serving in the military. I think that gives us a much better head start on where we want to end up being, again, maybe not in 2050, but in 2030.
And just maybe with some of those examples of where the state is right now on some of the important reforms in education with apprenticeships and school choice and your workforce preparation. Where do you see things going? You made such incredible progress during your 2 terms. And I know there's been a lot of activity this last year as well, but just where do you see the future in those key areas?
Yeah, I think there's just a ton of momentum out there. And again, not to be egocentric about it, I was all happy about being 97% school choice state, for families eligible. And then they made it 100%, which is good, right? You want to be moving in that direction. You want to be doing things that have traction and have momentum that prove out those different kind of earn and learn models and the employer training grants and the workforce ready grants, that we're looking at it from the employee perspective and looking at it from the employer perspective. And again, how do we meet in the middle? We just need to all, not just Indiana, not just America, we all need to be doing a whole lot more of that. And I'm encouraged that we come to a summit like this now. We're standing on the summit. We're looking down on the terrain, and the good news is, the good news, bad news is, I think there is a very healthy appetite, especially in this AI-infused economy, that folks sense there is great change a-coming. It's here. It's not just knocking on your door. It's inside your home right now. We have to be able to change the systems that we've been used to, whether it be the the unemployment insurance system that's been around for 90 years, was built for a very specific reason 90 plus years ago. What does it need to look like today? And I'm, again, encouraged that we have this fresh set of eyes that maybe are building the programs or promoting the policies or running as to be a policymaker, creating the app or the service that can hone in on the individual's potential, where they are now and where they need to be. And these programs that you talked about, these are very practical steps in that right direction. And I'm, very bullish, very optimistic, because not just coming to a summit like this, but seeing what is being tried maybe for the first time, the appetite, not just the acceptance, but the awareness now that's out more so than when I first got involved.
Thank you for that. And just I love some of the basketball examples. I was actually able to sit here last year with Governor Youngkin, and I think you're the 2 tallest former governors, and so I feel like a point guard between the 2 of you. But
You get scholarships for shooting, not passing.
Speaking of which, congratulations on your national champion in football too. But well, just as we wrap up here at the last minute, just any advice for us, just generally in terms of our responsibilities in our communities, but also just really as a country and as leaders, just what would be most helpful for us to keep in mind and going about our daily lives with our families and our roles in our, again, communities and in our civic responsibilities.
By the way, I also played point guard, so I never shot. I always passed. I just repeat myself and tell younger people, or advise them, still do, is to find out what you love, find out what your passion project is, make sure, as I said, that it is aligned with your personality, and remain positive through thick and thin, through hell or high water. The sun will come up tomorrow, and you're going to reflect on this one day and hopefully be proud about what your contribution was, and it'll be here before you know it. You'll be sitting up here doing this instead of as a practitioner. And I'm, again, very optimistic about what's coming and the fusion that's involved right now.
Well, thank you, Governor. It's been a treat to be with you today. So.
Thank you.
All right. So for our next session on the FUSIONX stage, we are talking from experience to insight, state chiefs on system leadership. And you rarely see education leaders from across the country really get a chance to sit down together like this in public, sharing notes. Today we have 3 former state chiefs and a sitting commissioner comparing notes about what it actually takes to lead public education at scale. Our conversation today will be moderated by Angelica Infante Green, Rhode Island's current Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education, and she'll be joined by Amy Guidera, the former Secretary of Education for Virginia, Deborah Gist, the former Commissioner of Education for Rhode Island, and Dr. Christina Grant, former State Superintendent of Education for the District of Columbia. Please give these education leaders a warm welcome to the FUSIONX stage.
Okay, so you're in store for a treat now. So we're here joined by 3 women that have done the job that I'm currently doing, and they are going to share with us some information that you will not hear anywhere else, because they can be candid and they can speak their minds in ways that the person sitting in the seat cannot. So let's get started. You've all sat in the chief seat at some point. What do you think you understood, or what do you think you understood about system change before you were actually in that role? What did you actually learn once you took that role? Amy?
Hello, everyone. Sorry. I'm Amy Guidera, and I also need to clarify, I was actually never a chief, but I was Secretary of Education in Virginia, which oversaw education from early childhood through higher ed. So I believe as change agents and how do we do systems change, I'm a big believer that there is a science of change management, and for any kind of lasting impact of change to happen, there needs to be an awareness for a need to change, there needs to be a desire by the people being affected by the change to change, and there also needs to be a knowledge of how to do that change. And that's why I'm a big believer in data, because data is a tool to do that. But what I knew after doing this for 4 years, you can go in and you can set the table, you can provide all the data you want, you can create the vision, you can build desire and knowledge and awareness. And unfortunately, politics trumps so much of everything that you can lead everybody to that and understand. But at the end of the day, and this is the sad part, is that, and concerns me right now, and I'd love my colleagues to hear, that the politics are so bitter and divisive right now that even things that people know are the right things to do for students are not happening because of the politics. And that, it makes me sad to have to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when it comes to systems change, I would agree. There's so much that we know about change management. I would say, if I'm thinking about the question, I would think about, like, what did I think about being a state chief before, like, as I was going into it, and then during and after? And I would say, to answer that question, I think it's about the fact that I thought it was like a policy job. And policy is a tool. Policy is like a thing that you do to make sure that conditions are right, but it really is about establishing conditions. It's about politics. It's about relationships. It's about implementation. And so if we over-focus on what are the policies that we're putting into place, or how do we get good policy into place, or remove bad policy or improve policy, then we're kind of missing the rest of the point. And if we don't focus on that implementation part, if we don't focus on how do we bring people along statewide, then the policies might change, but that doesn't mean that there are going to be any real differences that end up happening.
Yeah, I think I'd say 3 quick things. As much as I knew the role was political, I underappreciated just how political. And in a place like DC, one would honestly say, duh, but you sit at the intersection of so much, and the district is so different in that most people don't know that all laws in the DC are passively passed by Congress until they're not. And so it's just you're hyper aware of politics and your role as the face of that. And so I didn't appreciate that until I was in the role. The second part is you are making policy decisions, and Penny speaks a lot about this, that we get the policy when, but it's very rare that we actually get to see the arc of implementation. And so you have to have a laser-like focus on the policy because you're passing it down to schools and district leaders where I'm not coaching the principal, I'm not in the classroom. And so I deeply appreciated my experience in practice inside schools as it relates to policy decisions that were gonna outlast my tenure. And I think the other kind of aha moment is all of the work we were talking around about change management and building teams. You have a short amount of time to get a lot done, and in many respects, it isn't necessarily even about you, it's about the team of individuals, many of which who were in the department before you got there and will be there when you leave, that you empower, inspire, and push toward the change in your system. And I think a lot of people go into the superintendency thinking it is about them, and you quickly realize that it actually, like, you have to create policy conditions for your leaders to thrive. Like, that's the job.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I think all three of you have mentioned. You know, you really have 2 or 3 years before the political winds change. And Deb, you and I have been in the same seat, in the same state. And
I have been in the same seat.
That's right. Yeah. It's so interesting. What do you tell someone that's going into this role about their first 90 days? Like, what is, you know, you think you know, you walk in there, you have this plan, but what is it that people get wrong about that?
I think it's this weird combination of that you have to, yes, go slow to go fast, and also you have to just go fast. So it's like, how do you do those two things at the same time? Because you have to go slow to go fast in the sense that you do have to focus on relationships. You have to earn credibility. You have to establish trust. You have to, you know, just all of that has to, and you have to diagnose. You have to understand. You can't just go into a place and start to change things that you don't have, you know, the background around or understand how things came to be. And at the same time, if you spend your time doing that, then the next thing you know, your 2 years have gone by and you haven't gotten anything done. So it's like, how do you both do that kind of going slower part, but also move quickly and make sure that you are getting quick wins, identifying things that are standing in the way of educators and families and students every day, remove those barriers, keep building that momentum and get that change to be underway while you're also establishing the conditions.
Yeah. So we went in, so 2 answers, yes to everything that Deb said, and we went in and we knew one of the biggest things we had to do in the Yankton administration was to level set where we were. Everyone knew we went in saying we're going to restore excellence to education, and people all said, how dare you? Well, this is Virginia. You know, angels sing. And I'm like, and have you looked at your test scores for poor kids? You know, no, they are crying. But we went in, and within 90 days, we produced our commitment to Virginians, which was our 90-day report that said, and again, back to change management, here is the data. Here is where we are. We're going to put it up there. We're going to document where we are, and we're going to lay out the vision of where we need to go as a state. And then we're going to say, how are we going to get there? And we're going to keep everyone updated with a commitment to transparency, and we're going to hold the system accountable for this. So we very quickly went up there. We said, here are our guiding principles. Here are our goals. Here's how we're going to do it. And I worked for a boss who was really simple. He said, define what is best in class, define where we are, go find someone who is doing it the best in the nation, and then go figure out how we do it the Virginia way, right? And that we did that for every single thing we did in education, is to, again, look at data, but look at best practices, look at evidence, and then continue to be transparent about our actions and the results and where we need to do changes over those 4 years. And time was a real issue. You know, Virginia is the only state in the nation to have a one-term limit for a governor, and so we were, those days, every single minute counted. So we had to be really strategic.
You were making the case for change.
Yes, and we had to.
Setting the vision.
Yeah.
Christina?
I mean, I think in the spirit of saying things that current chiefs can't say, you have 90 days to figure out what you can get done in the time horizon that you get to lead. So first, you're stepping back. You are meeting everyone, taking all your information, and you have 90 days to set your strategic vision. You have 90 days to identify your research agenda. You have 90 days to corral your board. I had 90 days to get appointed. So even the context of how you get the role is critically important. But at the end of that 90 days, there's no, even if you aren't transparently saying it, you have to be laser focused that I was like, all right, high impact tutoring, reopening the school systems, pushing on literacy. And I was clear about what I couldn't get done. Like, I'm gonna lay the foundation for lots of things, but like, I didn't take on numeracy in my 3 years. I needed to get the schools open, increase our NAEP scores, invest in literacy, and like do a lot of healing because we had been closed for 2 years. But I think those first 90 days are mission. It's like a marriage. Like in 90 days, they're looking back at you the same way you're looking at them, deciding if we made a good match. And I think some sitting chiefs miss that you don't have a lot of time because the politics are always moving, even if you feel stable.
Yeah, thank you for saying that because it is, we have 36 gubernatorial elections this year. So, you know, if you're thinking of being a chief, you should be listening to these ladies because they've done the job, and it's critical. It's critical that you really lay the foundation. So as we start talking policy tools, you all have done it, have experience around it, but what are the outcomes that you think you can take to scale with policy? If you had to name one lever that you've used, or one decision, one structural change that moved the needle during each of your tenure, what is that? Amy, do you want to get started?
Shocker. Data as a tool of improvement, right? How do you empower people with good information so they can make better decisions? And that commitment to transparency and being honest with people, especially yourself, about what's working, what's not working, and creating urgency.
Yeah, I think the through line to my current life, I run the Center for Education Policy Research at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. That's a mouthful. But my policy tool was the intersection of research and practice. And so we made seismic investments during the time of recovery in all of our academic interventions, and every single one of them was tied to a research partner. And so in very real time, and our research partner was Stanford, let me be clear, but in very real time, I was getting third-party guidance and validation on the investments we were making. And so I pivoted when necessary. We doubled down in certain areas. We strategically abandoned certain things. And the role that evidence played in my practice was mission critical as we were trying to recover the district. And I would argue the significant gains we saw both during my tenure that have sustained is directly connected to the role that research played in our day-to-day policy making decisions.
Could you also add, before Deb goes on, a little bit about your school models and your equity work?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. In a previous session, we were talking about this word equity, and I really actually think it's your core values aligned with what the expectations are that your community has for its children, that I don't know that I ever walked around saying it all the time, but we were really clear about, so DC, fun fact, we have just as much school choice as you would see in New Orleans. We have a voucher system, we have a charter system, we have a robust private school system, and then we have traditional DCPS children. And across all of those school models, I was very clear that I wanted any student in any of those models to have access to an excellent education. And our question was, how do we know? How do we evaluate? How do we make the investments? How at the state level do we lean in where we can to push that message forward, and then make deep investments along all sides. And so with literacy, we didn't just stand up comprehensive literacy investments in DCPS, we stood it across all of our schools. When we made grants available, we made them available to the extent that we could across all of our schools. And so you remain the autonomy at the district, at the LEA level, to say, what are you going to pick up? What are you going to put down? But at the state level, we were very, very clear that these options are for all of you to explore. And I think the best example, Friendship Public Charter Schools had as much dramatic gains in literacy as DCPS. And it truly is because both the operators are very competitive. But when we stood up our comprehensive literacy plan, they took heed to all of the state level advice and guidance on how they should structure their instructional program. And I think that's the right role that state commissioners play in that conversation, in an environment that has an active school choice community where parents really do vote with their feet. And in DC, parents have a lot of choice.
Yeah. So Deb, tell us about your tenure, and I want you also to talk about accountability, because you've done some hard things. That's always a tricky one.
Yes. Well, so my perspective, I think, is going to be different, because I was state chief in DC
created the agency
20 years ago, and I was state chief in Rhode Island more than 10 years ago. So I have like this distance that feels a little bit different. And so it's harder, both because I'm old and I forget, but also because like I think back and you wonder, like, what does last? What does make a difference? What sustains? And so, like, I think about the work that we did on graduation requirements in Rhode Island. And then I wonder, like, was there a stage that set for the incredible work that Angelica and her team have led on graduation change in requirements in Rhode Island? I'm not sure. I hope so. But you kind of try to play that long game. There was work that we did in Rhode Island that was like started as this tiny bit of work around what we called at the time blended learning. It was like sort of the early beginning of how do we use technology to more personalize learning for kids. And it was this sort of side thing that we started. It wasn't a big policy effort. It wasn't a huge. It wasn't about accountability. It was about opportunity. It was about kind of tapping into the entrepreneurial spirit of teachers and leaders, superintendents and principals in the state. And it took off like crazy. And I think in so many ways, and again, Angelica, I don't know what has stayed, but at the time it like elevated Rhode Island to being a place that was a leader in that kind of work. And it wasn't because we said, everyone has to do this, or here's the policy, and now, you have this much time, or anything. It was because we gave some incentives, we set the conditions, we gave some opportunity, and people got excited and rose to that level. So with the benefit of distance, decades and a decade, I think about it a lot differently. My guess is that if we had a bottle of wine here, that Amy and I could have a lot of conversations about accountability, because I think we have some of the same, but a lot of different thoughts about that. Because I think that the era of accountability, which is when I was a chief, when we were really heavy accountability, and believing that was such a huge lever, that I still believe it's incredibly necessary to have accurate information about where we are, because the point that you described from a broad scale level, we all need to know where we are so we can figure out where we're going. But also I think individual children and families need to know where they are as well. So I think there are a lot of reasons. But I also think that we very much at that time were very much over-indexing on what we thought that accountability systems would sort of get people to do, and under-indexing on the kind of supports and opportunities and incentives that I saw make a much bigger difference in the same amount of time.
So let's get that bottle of wine.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to watch this conversation.
So part of being in these positions and why it's so frustrating to have them be such short tenure so many times is that you have to be, education should be a learning enterprise in and of itself, right? Why conferences like this matter is so that you can reflect and think. So I agree with what you just said. And so in Virginia, what we changed when we redid our accountability system is that we don't call it an accountability system. We call it a school performance and support framework for exactly that piece, is that there was so much that was right during the No Child Left Behind era. In fact, it is the only time that we've had 20 years of constant rising of all student achievement for every cohort. We have not seen that again, and we have now just erased in the last 7 years, 9 years, all of that progress, which is a travesty. And so why we went back and doubled down on standards assessment and accountability is it works, and we know that we didn't do all the things right in terms of actually using data not as a hammer but as a flashlight. And so how we designed our quote unquote accountability system, which we do not call it that, was that the purpose of that data was to identify how well every school was serving every student so that we could prioritize the resources of time, energy, and money, and things that worked, evidence, Christina, to the schools that needed the most help, the students who needed the most help, the teachers who needed the most help, so that every single school and student could be on track. So I think, again, how do we learn from things that maybe didn't work the whole way? And that's the beauty of why we need to go back and learn from predecessors and what happened, is that we need to get continuously smart and be thoughtful.
Yeah, so
Yes, but let's get that wine.
So I'm going to add, and I'll take a glass since I'm still on the job. Yeah. But
You
I
need your
will
own
say
bottle.
that, that accountability that you did lay the groundwork, I want you guys to know that it still does matter.
That's what I was going to say.
It still does matter. I'll give you a very clear example in Rhode Island. We have this school that's high achieving statewide, and they could not get a 5-star because their multilingual learners were not doing well. The whole state was going to come after me to change the accountability system and do this and tweak that. And I was like, well, no, I think the accountability system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, right? And guess what happened this year? They're 5 stars because they had to pay attention to these students. So I think that, I think it's really important for us to, I think there has to be a balance, right? But I do think that it does work. I can tell you that those kids are no longer being ignored in that school. They are really, they are pushing the envelope with the things that they've had to learn and do. So I want to thank you for that.
And we cannot allow ourselves to go off into this fictitious world where we want to give everyone a trophy. I think it is an actual sin and a shame if you give a child a high school diploma and it's not worth the paper it's printed on. And I was that child. So I believe in accountability aggressively because parents need to know, and you have to believe. There is not one parent in this room that cannot process the difference between my child going to a 1-star school and a 5-star school. So we can call it stars, clovers, happy face, sad face. Parents deserve to know what their child is learning, the rate with which they are learning. And in a conference like this, the role that AI, innovation, and accountability in the future of our education system, there's no more moment than now that we could actually normalize these conversations. And I think that is one of the biggest learnings, that we did a lot of things to systems as opposed to doing things with systems. And so if we dramatically rethought the way we talked about school performance at every level to every stakeholder, I think we would have maybe lemonade instead of wine as we talk about the performance of our children. Because some children in this country are getting access to an excellent education, and far too many more are not. And it's our job to bridge that gap. And I actually am really excited about the role that AI can play in that conversation, from cognitive-based assessments to the future that it could play in learning management systems, literally to the future it can play in lesson planning. There's just so many different ways the tools could produce better outcomes for children that's grounded in accountability.
So I want to ask you guys a question, because I think we all know that we have these policy ideas, we put them in place, but the most difficult thing is implementation, right? It is really difficult. Like, we are now in the process in Rhode Island, we've passed a law on everybody has to be certified in the science of reading. We also have high quality curriculum, but implementation is so hard. We have just created a tool in Rhode Island for implementation of high quality curriculum and the science of reading. So, but what happens is that once you have these policy, state ed is a place where a lot of these policies go to die, right? How did you fight against that? Like, how did you keep alive what you knew was the right thing for your individual states or roles? Do you want to start, Deb? We'll go this way.
So I spent the last, well, minus the last 2, but for 8.5 years was a district superintendent after I was state chief in DC and Rhode Island. And so my thinking about state policy and these systems, and it shifted when all of a sudden I was just so focused every day on what we needed to do for kids in our system. And I just really needed the state to not get in our way. Like, I just needed them to, like, remove barriers, not get in our way, not make it harder. And yes, to the extent that there were tools and systems and resources and things that they could do, great. And so, when I think about implementation, I think about it with my district superintendent hat on, and I think about the hat that my principals wore every day and the hat that the teachers wore every day. It's so much more, they're not thinking about policy every day. Policy has to set the conditions. Policy has to smooth the path. Policy has to raise expectations. And policy has to be clear about what needs to happen. But otherwise, we just need to let the folks then implement and support their implementation. So it really changed my view about being a state chief after I was out of that for another 10 years.
I mean, I'd say in hopefully 60 seconds, it's also just clarifying what the role of the state chief is. So your role literally is to create the policy conditions for your LEAs to thrive. For us in DC, I can tell you, I mean, we made seismic investments in high impact tutoring, but I knew first, I was like, oh, you know who should not monitor implementation? The state. So while we were standing up grants for our districts, we also stood up grants for nonprofit organizations to receive funds to manage implementation. So I can tell you that City Tutor did the design sprints. City Tutor could tell me which schools had which dosage at which rates, because that's not the work. Well, some would argue that is the work of the state. I've not seen many states do it well, because states are not staffed and funded in ways that districts are funded. So you've got to know enough to know what part am I going to keep super, super close. Right. At the state, that is the policy process. That's the legislative process. That's fighting for money. That's being the last stop when children make really, really poor decisions, or parents do. But I think we have to dramatically change the role that people perceive the state in playing in implementation. And so for us, we had transparent dashboards on our spending. We had transparent dashboards on the progress that we were making. We had a really clear strategic plan. But when it was time for implementation, I was really mindful of which partners the state needed to partner with to ensure that implementation was done well.
That's right. Two quick examples. Thank you. Two quick examples. One, the state role is to set out what students are going to learn, to provide that transparency and an accountability system so that everyone knows how well every school's doing it. And then third, the one that we have failed consistently on is then supporting and building the capacity to do that. And so one of the things that we did is we rebuilt our entire agency to be a learning enterprise itself. And to give a very tangible example, in our old system, you would identify schools that weren't ready, and we would label them, and then we'd make them do stupid things like show up in meetings on Saturday morning and basically have detention, and no one got any smarter. Everybody hated it. Nothing changed. And instead, what we said is, well, what would be useful? Like, we don't understand why the data. So we are now changed everything. Every single person in the agency has a new description that describes how they impact student learning and what they do. So we've changed. We also, I think, are the second state to get flexibility from the U.S. Department of Education, and we are rethinking how we're deploying money in a way that is supporting and building the capacity and doing coaching and letting the local level do what it's supposed to do, which is the how. How do you personalize learning? How do you address where there are things? How do you keep doing what's working well? And the state's role is to, one, stay out of the way of the good things happening, and when things are not working well, to say, how do we help you? What do you need? And so we've also doing a whole training of coaching on how do you interpret the data so you can say, so what does this data tell us? And now what are we going to do differently at the local level? And it's a different mindset. And my second thing I'll just say, part of what I loved about being a Secretary of Education is that it was about silo busting. And so much about implementation is that in government, everything is siloed by money streams. And I would find that we were trying to do all this pathways work, And I said, this is ridiculous. We're pulling together a weekly meeting with all the agency heads that I call the talent leads, like all the people that were about investing in people, from the economic development team to the early childhood team, and it would only be the agency heads talking. And I said, the only agenda here is, what are you working on that everybody at this table needs to know about so that we can start doing it? The second hour of that weekly meeting was with their teams. And what I realized is the most valuable thing that we actually got done is that we exchanged names, emails, and phone numbers, because people did not actually know who was on the other end of dual enrollment. Guess what? You can't have a really effective dual enrollment program if you don't actually know the people that are responsible for it at the community college system when you're doing it from K-12. So that's about thinking about, what are we all trying to do? What are those big, hairy, audacious goals? And how do we do it together?
Thank you, Amy. So I'm going to ask you guys a very quick question, and then I'm going into a lightning round. All right, so for everyone in this room, philanthropists, policymakers, district leaders, what's one thing that you would like them to understand about educational leadership at the state level? You know, what would that be? One thing.
That's so hard. Goodness. It's not just like a bureaucratic sinkhole. There's a lot of innovation. Actually, I'll reframe my answer. There's a tremendous amount of power and possibility at the state level. We really have a lot of access to things that could move the needle for children.
Great.
I'm so excited about the work that I see state leaders doing right now on Angelica, the work that you all are doing in Rhode Island. Dr. Jenner is here, the work that's happening in Indiana. And what I see that's different, that I think is so powerful, that is one thing I think about right now, is the way that the work that you all are leading is all it's like the whole system, and not just a project on teacher quality and a thing about standards and a thing about this, but it's like, how does the portrait of a graduate and the accountability system and the high school graduation requirements, how do they all fit together?
Okay, so I'm going to move us to the lightning round. Sorry, Amy. So here's the question, and you guys are going to answer it very quickly. The thing that you wish someone had told you before you took this job. Very quick. One sentence answer.
So I'll start, and this would be my last answer too. The power of the status quo is unbelievably strong, and you cannot be a change agent by yourself. And if you believe that change needs to happen, it is about bringing everyone together.
Okay, good.
I'll go super quick. For as much as I got done, I should have gotten even more done. Like, I should have pushed 1,000 times harder. Because when I look back, I'm like, I could have put way more points on the board for kids. And I think I did really well.
That it is really, really difficult, but also the best work in the world, and really, really important, and hang in there.
All right, what is one thing that, even though it's popular in education right now, you're a little skeptical about?
Master's degrees for educators. The data says they don't add value.
I'll say accountability for all instructional models. You guys read into that. I think anything receiving public dollars should be evaluated, and we should transparently know if it works or doesn't work for kids. Do with that what you will.
Okay.
I think we have to move to a new generation of accountability and assessment, and Transcend, who I'm here representing, is about to release a new paper on that. And that paper, I think, is going to be important in the field.
All right.
And the future of assessment. Should be cognitively based.
There you go. And you said that with a lot of enthusiasm. The last question, very quickly, lightning round.
There's still more.
The thing that you're most hopeful about in the next 5 years for our students.
Oh, the power of fusion. I dramatically think that these AI tools in the right hands of educators could transform who has access to a quality education in this country. And it'll be a sin and a shame if we don't pull that off.
I think I'm excited about that too, and what I'm excited about are the parts of it that allow us to get the administrative stuff and let the human interaction part rise more to the top.
Thank you. I'm excited about the fact that we have a growing amount of proof points of showing that when we break up the one-size-fits-all system, awesome results do, and so we're going to have more and more systems giving themselves permission to color outside the lines, and that will help kids.
All right. So join me in thanking these ladies for being here today. If you have any questions, they're here.
Can we take a group picture?
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Fusion stage. Please? No, that's fine. Really appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of the summit. There's so much going on out there. Have a great time. Thank you for joining us.
Please take a moment to silence your electronic devices. The program will begin shortly.
They are. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about this panel, and I'm really excited about this STAR panel because I want to start with this idea that America is not perfect. We're not. We've had all men are created equal in 1776, we the people in 1787, yet America had slavery, women didn't have full rights, LGBTQ didn't either. But throughout all of this, we have had Americans who are willing to give their life, blood, sweat, and tears for the idea of America. And that's what we're going to explore today. That no matter the color of your skin, who you love, who you worship, the idea of America keeps our country going, it keeps our democracy going. And so in the next 40 minutes, we're going to explore what it means to be an American right now in this point in time. And so, Eric, I'm hoping that we can start with you. If you could just give us a state of play of our democracy 250 years since our founding.
Well, yeah.
So easy.
That's called a cold open. Rosa, thank you so much for hosting this conversation, and it's great to be here. And thanks for you all for showing up. This is some of us were chatting before we started that this session, this topic, is a little atypical for this gathering, for this conference. You know, some of you may remember maybe it's still the current slogan for the Marine Corps in their ads, the few, the proud. The Marines, this is the few and the proud who have decided that in a time like this, it really does matter to explore the American idea. And I think this is so central. Rosa, I think, you know, the state of our democracy, the state of our union, I would say is damaged and resilient. And it's not a but, it's more of an and. The damage is everywhere to be seen, from whatever part of the country you live, whatever ideological perspective you might hold. We know that our institutions have been corroding for generations now, that our sense of responsibility to each other has been fraying, and the social fabric has been fraying as the country becomes more unequal, and as many of the forces actually powered by many of the people at this conference are atomizing us and isolating us from one another. That damage is real, and we feel it in our bones. And the resilience is equally a fact. I am, to use the language of Silicon Valley investors, I am long on America. Like I bet on this country. And I think our resilience and our capacity for renewal goes straight to the thing that you just opened with, which is not a piece of rhetoric. This